This is episode 4 of the People, Passion, and Purpose Year 3 program of bringing women stories to the forefront and women also to share their stories. And the idea is that more women sharing their stories inspires more women to share their stories. So that's the simple agenda as is. And most of the times when I ask people saying, can you share your stories on a podcast? The response always is, do you think I have a story to tell? And I say, you always have stories to share. Does not matter that you are not yet reaching some of your goals, but a lot of your experience reaches out to people, and experience is what matters. And human life experience is what matters. So we have Roohi with us today, and she is the protagonist for our conversation today. She sent a long list of who she is. I'd rather skip that and say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the other person on the side. So, Rui, over to you. I think you said this is going to be a blockbuster for podcast. I am
Wow.
letting that reach to you and say, yeah, go on. If you were to introduce yourself, I know you're a computer science engineer, teacher, education policy, space researcher, strategy and implementation specialist, and it goes. So I can say, okay, small batch granola entrepreneur. I don't know what that means, but I'll ask you what it means. But yeah, all the conversations that we've had, even though it's only a two or three conversations as of now, it's promising to be very interesting. So I let the universe guide us in this podcast and say wherever you want to go, you go. So what do you introduce yourself, share your stories, and I'll jump in with some questions like all good coaches do.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sunil, for having me on this podcast. It's an honor, and I take notes, and I have some notes with me. I also like to call myself a organized, messy person. They both have a place together because my inner world is very organized. Sometimes my outward is messy, and vice versa happens too. So notes help, and I know I'm the best note taker because I've also learned from the best. So I gave you that bio. It was a very cheeky bio with a lot of qualifiers, and there was a reason for that. Um, I was thinking the right words, and I was like, what will do justice to who I am? And I gave you all those qualifiers. And this was also me trying to apply for a job, knowing I meet all 10 on 10 criteria, like how every woman in my life I know does. It's also exciting to take that much space, but terrifying at the same time. I've also not done a podcast ever, so this is actually a new job. When I say that women apply when they know that all 10 on 10 things are met, this is also evidence-based research. And it's also the only way ever that I've approached a new job application. So I had to give you those qualifiers. But of all the hats that I've worn, my most impactful and my most meaningful role is to date has been that of a mother.
Mm-hmm.
I also sit in a lot of contrast because I'm a non-custodial parent to a 7-year-old who's a kind, sassy, very perceptive 7-year-old. Being a non-custodial parent means I don't have physical access to him. It's the biggest inequity I sit with, and which is also the biggest part of my story, apart from all the qualifiers. But the qualifiers mattered because they give me the confidence to tell my story. The qualifiers matters because I've collected them over the course of my 37 years of life. The qualifier matters because they tell me about the type A student who did not know how to fail, and academic achievement, professional achievement was the only way forward for her. And so I don't hide behind them, I lead with them. But my backbone is my kid, and actually kids. I've also lost another kid. So, and for some reason, I cannot talk about only one of them. It's I think till my last breath, it's always going to be kids and not kid, in presence and in spirit. And so yeah, I will stop there. That's who I am.
Interesting. So it's always how we introduce ourselves that tells us a lot of who we are. So uh, organized and messy at the same time, and we both of us being from the same coaching group. Possibly, I would have said, okay, where is Ronaldo in it? But I didn't do that. But anyways, in terms of the intensity of whatever you shared, uh, I think it takes a lot to even process what is a non-custodial parent. And also the qualifiers, I think, always are a benefit in terms of how you introduce yourself, what do you see about yourself. And if you do want me to, I can read the entire bio, but I feel that your persona in the session and in the space here already adds to a lot of it. And through this conversation, we'll be able to get to.
Sure.
So, an interesting question that popped my head was, if your life were to be a book, what would you name it?
Never without my kids.
Never without my kids. So that's the topic. That's the uh, this thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I were to open chapter 5, page 7, what would I find there?
Chapter 5, page 7. Wow. Okay. You're flipping the narrative that I am going with. So I'll have to think of this. Uh, I think I go back and forth in a lot of things, but I think the keyword I want to pop, and it's also part of my North Star statement. In my coach, I'm also a women centric and leadership coach. And in that journey, I've tried to hone one line North Star statement for myself, which is I am trying to solve for inequity in this world by owning my time, place, and bank account. That's my North Star statement. It's simple, but it has so many layers for me. But the inequity piece is very important because I told you that, the non-custodial parent bit is where I sit with inequity. But I think this value is so important to me because in my life, I felt, what you don't get, you seek. And growing up, some things were not fair. I didn't feel included, which is why I guard this value and I expect it in every surrounding I have. And that is how I bring rigor to my people, my humans. And sometimes I push back. Sometimes I am very fierce about being in creating that equity, whether it's in being kind, whether it's social virtues like gender, caste, religion. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the right words always, but it's always the endeavor to come forward with the best I have and put my foot forward and uh, strive for equity in whatever I do. So I think every chapter will have that element of equity, whether it's chapter 5 or chapter 30 or chapter 1, it has to start with equity.
What got you started on this quest of equity?
Uh, I think it starts at home. I grew up in a middle class family. Education was always important. And I think that when I say middle class family, it means you make trade-offs. There are resources for education, books, but not all novels. There are resources for the Maslow's need hierarchy, the first set of rules, but maybe not cassette tapes that I want all the time. You won't have food from outside, and maybe we won't do as much travel, but that is the state when I say I come from a middle class family. I also grew up in a home where I used to get hit as a child, and both me and my sister. And and that used to happen through my dad. And I think that is where, when even when I did not know what inequity meant, the seed for that was sown there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Now, where's that seed?
I am trying to solve for it now. So I think I'm trying to use the stuck energy that it gave me for 37 years to hopefully now channel it and create some waves. I don't need to finish the work, but I think one of my biggest strengths is in being an ignition starter, if anything else. So uh, I hope whatever I do powers more people to do similar work, and we have change.
And in that uh, aspect, so what all do you do? I think there is a lot of things that you do.
Do you want me to read my own bio?
It will be a first. Go for it.
Okay, I can do that because I am nothing without my notes, and those notes really are helpful. Okay. Roohi is a computer science engineer, teacher, education policy wonk, researcher, strategy and implementation specialist, facilitator, program designer, writer, speaker, board member, systems thinker, bridge builder, inequity warrior, small batch granola entrepreneur, and a women centric and leadership coach in her professional capacity. But her most impactful, most meaningful role to date has been as a mother.
So, as all coaches ask, what does it mean for you?
It means a whole lot. I mean, I think I also ran this bio with a few friends and some uh, uh, actually a friend, two friends, a cousin, yeah, three of them. And they gave me so much inspiration and encouragement, and I think that really helped. But I also was looking for validation, and they gave me that. And you need to validate yourself, but it's also fun if others are in your life to do it for you, and they did it. I'm glad.
So, when you say again, validation brings in a very interesting point. So, any other stories that you would like to share about how your life experience has been working for equity now?
Yeah. So I started. Like all Indian kids, if you're good in math and science, you're pushed gently or strongly to pursue either engineering or medicine. So for me, uh, I love math. I loved math as a kid. I still love math. And for me, that was engineering. I studied engineering, computer science engineering in a college in Rajasthan, and it's called Modi Institute of Technology and Sciences. It's a women's deemed university for women, and it was the first time that I was in a girls only institution, and it was I learned a lot, but I think apart from computer science, the thing I learned the most was having those set of friendships. And I learned how to be a very good elected class representative for 4 years. I was unanimously elected as class rep. I didn't know how much I would enjoy it, but that was also a highlight of my time there. I then worked in the tech space. I worked with IBM for a year and a half, and um, I was, it was good work. I was learning a lot again, but I wasn't inspired enough. Something was amiss, and I did not know what that was. I was starting to look for options, and I gave the CAT exam, standard MBA pursuit after engineering, but I still wasn't convinced that 2 years and some 12, 13 lakhs later, I would still want to be an investment banker or some other kind of MBA profession. And so I took a leap of faith and I did the Teach for India Fellowship. It's a 2-year program where you leave your full time. Um, job to go teach in low income schools in various cities. Now it's a whole movement that originally stemmed from Teach for America, which was started even 20 years before Teach for India did.
Oh,
And so yeah, and the whole network is in, I mean, I don't know the number of countries, but that whole Teach for All network is now spreading in 60, 70 countries across the world, where similar model is replicated, but in the local policy context. So um, talking about ripples. And so I did that for 2 years, and it felt like I found a calling. uh, I could see firsthand the difference in the education I had received in a public school in a public school in Delhi. And when I say public, okay, this also needs warranting. When I say public school in Delhi, it's not the government school. I went to a private school, but because the British schools are called public schools, in India it's called public schools, but it's a private school. I went to a private school in Delhi, so I could see the stark difference in the education I was receiving in Delhi. I went to APJ school, uh, Pitampura in Delhi, and then the education my kids, my third and fifth graders, I had 86 of them over 2 years, they were receiving. So it was a huge responsibility. I could see the inequity again, right? And so it was important that I educated myself to show up. And what that meant was I used to fail every single day. I was in a third grade classroom where I had to teach face value, and I literally failed 5 times before I before my entire class got the hang of what place value meant, the third graders. And why I say that is that you can be a good math student and ace that subject, but if you have to break it down to a third grader, you don't know the difference between what needs to be taught in second grade versus third grade versus fourth grade. So you have to take bets, you have to do trial and error, and you have to see. And ultimately what worked was I had to bring in real money and sit with coins with my kids and literally bundle one rupee coins, and then 10 notes, and then 100 note and 1,000 note. And that's what worked. So I had to do the abstract and then make alive through the concrete, and that's where magic happened. But it was a magical space of learning both for me, and initially I thought I was coming in the classroom to do some good work, which happened, but I didn't realize how equally transformational it would be for me. The kind of stories I got to witness, the kind of love I received from those 86 kids, uh, mothers who would walk 5 kilometers just to talk to me about what the kids were doing. Uh, it was very humbling. We did fabulous projects where we tracked reading stamina 1 minute at a time on a public board, so that the entire class had visibility on how much they were progressing from day by day. In the second year, I took 4 kids from Pune to Delhi in an airplane. These are kids who have never traveled outside of their neighborhood, maybe in an auto. And I fundraised so we could travel in an airplane. We went to Delhi. They were also communicating with fifth graders from my school in APJ, uh, and doing writing projects. So they met their pen pals. We went to IIT Delhi. Uh, we also uh, did a baking workshop. We went to Nehru Planetarium. It was a whole project. And for me, just orchestrating that project was the biggest high. And so that project stays with me. Once my Teach for India 2 years were done, uh, I wanted to see what impact looked like outside the classroom, and which also eventually took me to my master's program that was in the US. I studied education policy after that. And now the learning here was, because I did engineering, I I was forced, or I internalized, that I'm a left brain person. But it was in my liberal arts masters in education policy program for the first time in my life is when I realized I'm actually a very good right brain person. I'm creative, and there are these ideas, and I can apply concepts that relate to each other and make meaning out of it. It was a very fulfilling experience. My and another funny thing is, I get it. This was a university. I went to University of Washington. This was a university um, which had access, and so the library system there was so fabulous. You could order. You could. I mean, as a education policy student, you could sit in your home, order a book online, show up to the library, and pick it up. Wherein in my computer science engineering program at the time, I was handwriting my homeworks and assignments, and it it was like I could see the funny in all of this. And I wish we have libraries the way I saw libraries, both in my university and during my time, even the public libraries there. So this needs a shout out for libraries. I know I'm making it a monologue to the question you asked me, but it's important, so I'm going on. Um, and yeah, I'll pause for now.
So I'm very, very interested in how you did that fundraising for kids in Pune to go to Mumbai or Delhi.
Delhi, from Pune to Delhi. Oh,
Pune to Delhi.
that is another interesting project. I had put out a post on Facebook with a wish list for my class library,
Okay.
and in a few days, friends and kind relatives just bought all the books, and within a few days, I had a library, and I was
Hmm.
like, wow, this is amazing. I can do projects because my school did not have resources. Some days when the electricity was not there, I was taking my classroom under a tree, and we were doing impromptu stuff in under that tree, doing storytelling or whatever. And I was like, I put out stuff and it gets done. So how do I do more of this? So I wrote my version of an ask and an email. I was very proud of it, and I sent it to some friends, and I heard back from some of them, and it was another high. And I also, because I had done IBM before, also reached out to some of my tech friends, and they were already interested in supporting some of these projects. So over the course of 2 years, I was I did Teach for India between 24 and 26 years of age, and or in 23 and a half to 25 and a half, something like that. And I raised 2 lakhs 50,000,
Wow.
and I was able to, and I spent every single month rupee in that. I was able to get my classroom painted. I got a mural artist. I learned negotiation by haggling and saying, I have a nonprofit salary, so you need to give me a better rate because these kids need education. And so every single place I went to, I went with that sense of possibility. And this phrase I learned at Teach for India, sense of possibility, it stays with me. And so yeah, I did a lot of negotiation, and then we got a projector for a class for the classroom. We did a lot of excursions, and I also told them that every single day when the class gets over at 2 p.m., we will have a reading circle, which was my way of doing differentiated readings. And so if you showed up, we will do chips and coke for whoever showed up. Everybody used to come for chips and coke initially. This was the second year I played classroom, but eventually I started hiding the chips and coke, and I didn't have it every single time, but they still stuck on. So something was working. And on some days I would work with my highest order kids who were reading at Harry Potter level. Some days I was working with kids who were reading Roald Dahl stuff. Some days I was working with kids who were reading Enid Blyton. And these were we had done a beginning of year test, end of year test, and middle of year test. So I knew what grade level they were in. So it was that process made it possible to group them. And then we also had the most emergent readers who couldn't even who could just read pictures. So for them, it would be some version of a picture book with a few words. So there was space for everyone. So, but that space was also very meaningful to me because I love reading, and so to be able to give that gift to them felt like um, such an honor to pass that legacy on, and for them to say that oh, I love reading. And then I read this book called Teach Like Your Hair's on Fire. It's another amazing read.
Interesting.
Would highly recommend it, especially as a teacher. It's a teacher, Ray Fesquith, who teaches a fifth grade classroom, and he does it year by year. But the kind of systems he would set were like flawless, impeccable. There was classroom currency. Children owned what they said, and I don't remember it entirely, so I'll try to attempt it. He talks about this framework where he taught his kids, why do I do what I do? And I
Mhm.
try to replicate it exactly the way he did it. And I'll tell you the impact of that. So it means I am a level one person if I do what I do because I'm afraid. I am a level two person if I do what I do because I need to please someone. I
Mhm.
and I could be mixing the orders, but it was some version of this. I'm a level three person if I'm doing it for a gift or for a reward. I am a level four person if I follow rules, and that's why I do it. I'm a level five person if I want to be considerate of the other person sitting next to me, so I'm doing it that way. And there, I'm a level six person, which means I have a very strong personal code of conduct, and which is why I do what I do. And we discussed this in detail in classroom that this entire spectrum doesn't mean that you always stay at level one or level two or level six. For sometimes you'll be level two, sometimes you'll be level six. And the interesting thing is that there was conversation in the classroom where I heard two kids saying, you know what, I am a level three kid today because I did it for the sharpener that was uh, promised in the gift for for reading a book. And my mind was blown because this is evoking awareness in coaching. The fact that they could see what level they were operating in, and that self awareness. Um, it was an extreme high for a 25-year-old to experience that in action. So, yeah, I sometimes lose my train of thought. So you have to bring me back to the question. I'll stop.
We started basically with the whole idea of your experience with taking those kids on a plane,
Yeah,
and also yeah, I think you subtly moved it to that plane of possibility. So what is that you said?
of possibility. Yeah.
So I think yeah, because you such a interesting experience condensed into say 37 years of life. I'm now confused in saying which tangent to sort of take. There's the engineer tangent, there's the policy tangent, there's Teach for India, there's now currently you work in a non-profit, uh, right? So also you
We
said
can
you are
also skip to the hard part. I don't mind that.
okay. Ask the hard question and answer it yourself.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Because I don't know what is a hard question for you, and what's a question that switches gears from first gear to gear three or gear five. But what works for you?
I think I'll try and follow my notes. Uh, Even they don't have a whole, like, it's not very structured. 1 second.
So what are values that you live by in life?
There are many, but the two top ones are there's one that I need for me, and there's one that I expect of the world. The I need for me is safety.
Mm-hmm.
The what I expect of others is equity because I already embody it in myself.
Very interesting. So what I expect from the world and what you need for yourself. I think that's the first time somebody's ever answered that in that way.
I don't know
Hmm.
what that means. Okay.
So if you were to put saying, or if I were to ask your friends and say, or ask yourself, saying, if I had to really meet the real Ruhi, and the truly authentic, the 100% space, and do that in, say, possibly three stories, what would those three stories have quickly?
Uh, I am there's a movie called Hollywood Bollywood, or maybe Bollywood Hollywood, which has Lisa Ray, and she says, "I can be whoever you want me to be."
Mm-hmm.
And even in my introduction, I use so many qualifiers. And I think, especially when you're a hustler, when you are entrepreneurial, when you've worn multiple hats and tried different problems, but you come to the same solution. And if you put all my job profiles, all the work I've done, and you get equity, um, so yeah, I think that does come a lot in. But in terms of stories, when I think I'll go with I can be whoever you want me to be one. Then uh, the mom persona, the mother persona is very strong to me. And I'm a very good friend. Yeah,
Okay. So very good friend, the mom persona, and then
I can be whoever you
three.
want.
You can be three, whoever you want. It is almost like I think it gives me Game of Thrones vibes, Arya Stark, right? So I'm what's that? I am no one. So I don't know. I think there's so many layers to your persona. So I don't know if one podcast can do justice to that. But I'm also, you know, curious to understand because I also work with some of the um, outside a city kind of a school, right? So beyond the city limits, the education policies or the way education happens a very different ballgame. So how is it working with kids in Teach for India? For somebody who does not know it beyond saying, exam, school, uh, Ratamar, finish the exam. What is the reality that exists there?
I I'm trying to find the right words.
Hmm.
When I often ask people, what is your hobby? And I
Hmm.
ask that because this is a space where you lose track of time. And hobbies are important because when you lose track of time, your intuition speaks to you. So for me, those 2 years felt like a calling, which have a space even today in my life because I was having fun.
Hmm.
I was not looking at the clock. I was multitasking crazily, but I was not looking at a clock. And which is why my intuition probably was speaking to me and I was doing or being led by it. Um, I didn't know that's what it meant. Today I can articulate that because that space also comes alive for me when I bake. A lot of people tell me, why do you not have a bakery? Because if I do have a small, very small side hustle where make word of mouth granolas and sell it. But I don't do other baking aspects because if I created a bakery, then I would have to look at the clock because it would become a time bound thing. But baking is something that brings me a lot of joy because this is a space where I know every single time if at 10 p.m. I'm mixing eggs, flour, sugar, batter, all of that together, and it gives me the moist chocolate cake that everybody loves, and it's consistent. There's a lot that happens in that space. So, yeah.
Interesting. So now you added Baker into the mix. So I think now I'm a little more interested to meet you in person.
You should come to Delhi.
So you also shared a poem with me. So And you also said somewhere in that long list of interesting adjectives to describe yourself that you're a writer.
This is also interesting. Okay. For the longest time, okay, and now this has to go to my life in the US. I studied education policy, and I stayed in US for 8 years. Those 8 years were also my married years. I'm no longer married, I'm divorced. And uh, I I learned a lot about education, both in so my if Teach for India was my lived experience in teaching and practice rooted in grassroots experience, my time in the US understanding policy and how it operates was a lot of top down work that gets done in policy. How policies are made, how does implementation happen, why is it so messy? And at that time I thought my work, and I think I still, which is why I'll tell you why I use the word bridge builder. I stay in this messy pipeline that lies in between practice and policy. And why I say it's a messy pipeline, it's clogged and it's messy because there is a lot of bridge building that needs to happen. So, and when I say bridge building, it's a lot of meaning making layer, it's a lot of making sure you are expanding the options for multiple stakeholders that have competing interests. And so this is also a very big negotiation exercise. And I want to do a hard plug on game theory, which I love for the same reason. And I learned all of these things in my master's in education policy program. But I then did another fellowship called Education Pioneers, which was based in Boston. And this is where, think of it as Teach for India, but outside the classroom, which was also what I was seeking. So I work as a strategy fellow in the space of expanded learning time initiatives. What that means is uh, education, but from an after school, summer learning, uh, outside of classroom spaces learning. And I had to design a strategy brief for an organization called Building Educated Leaders for Life as part of my placement through Education Pioneers. Learned a great deal about the facts, very simple fact that if you need to scale operations in different states, how do you even go about that process? So for me it was, having data was great because I could go and see representatives and senators who had earlier invested in these initiatives. So going to each one of their profiles and making sure I find 10 of them who had, say, let's say find 10 of them who have supported this initiative in the past. So I know those are my go-to states. But then it was 2016 and elections were going on. It was Hillary versus Trump at the time, and it was also figuring out what happens if either of them come up. So it was a lot of cerebral exercise, but also unpacking a law that had come up, the ESA law, and so that was very educative at the time. I was 27, 28. I also started being on a board for the first time right after my master's program uh, through my university. I was a communications officer for my master's in education policy program advisory, alumni advisory board. It felt like a great deal. It was because it was the first time as a communication officer, and as the 16 member people that we were, we drafted bylaws. We were students and passed out students who had been selected by my professor Tom Halverson, uh, uh, and it was another fabulous experience to be on that board. And then I did that, came back to Seattle, which is where my majority of my time in the US was. I worked with this think tank and research and education policy analysis place. Uh, it- it's called Center on Reinventing Public Education, where I learned all my research skills, mixed method research skills in education policy. I worked in projects related to school choice, charter schools. Charter schools is another public private partnership model in education that I draw a lot of inspiration from in different areas that I work on even today. And and also tangentially worked on topics on of uh, how charter schools and special education students with disabilities intersect and what that looks like when it comes to school choice. It was a lot of structured and uh, very academic and amazing learning experience in that job. And these 4.5 years at Center on Reinventing Public Education, SERPI, were also the years when I gave birth. I became a mom. I think I should now pause this space of the academic part and come to the giving birth, and because why it's such a big role I hold in my life. Um, I have to now go back to being 17. It's going to flow back and forth. This is how my brain works. There's a lot of I can make sense of it, but now that I'm articulating it, I know it's moving back and forth. So bear with me. I met my ex-husband when I was in fourth grade. We were in the same school. It was like friends who have always known each other, meeting each other. We were on a picnic ride and singing Asha Bhosle's song on the top of our voices. We were in the same friend circle. We didn't start dating at fourth grade, just to be clear. But it was a really solid friendship. We were in the same friend circle all throughout. And we started dating right in the middle of 12th grade board examination. That's another story that I will not have scope for here. But so at 17, you don't know what your red flags are, your beige flags are, your um, green flags are. And I was in this relationship for 15 years till I was 32. And which means you also grow with each other. And if I was his, if he was my red flag in some ways, I was his. And we eventually, I mean, we got married when we were 26 and a half. And then I moved to the US. And if I were to say what broke the marriage, nothing and everything. And maybe the phrase that would uh, just do justice would be death by 1,000 paper cuts. And I think it's when you'll reach that stage where that straw that breaks the camel's back, and that's what does the damage, which is what happened essentially. And he broke my spirit and I broke his in turn. The marriage broke down in 2020. By that time, I gave birth. I gave my first son was born in 2017. The second one in 2019. I had uh, I had postpartum depression in both of them. It was a But you know what? I don't like to talk and call it postpartum depression only, because when you say postpartum depression, it becomes a woman's issue only. But it's not a woman's issue only. Which is why I think this part of my story is a story of isolation and now connectedness in this version of my life, how I see it. And so mothering in the US was a um it was isolating.
Mm.
And which is why, I don't want to trivialize it by saying it was just postpartum depression. And also, because I started in the tech space, people, and if you go to the US and you are working in a non-STEM field, um, it's hard to find a foot in the door for yourself in terms of, work opportunities. And this is when in 2013 I had established that education policy is going to be my calling. So I was sitting with a lot of contrast, lot of dichotomies within myself, that now in 2013 I'm saying this is my calling, but I come here, I do my masters, and finding a job becomes a challenge, and people are telling me, why don't you go back to tech? But I don't want to go back to tech because it's not life-giving to me the way education and education policy was. So people took bets on me, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But finding those opportunities, finding those bets were really hard. And so there was some angst already built up before I had kids because this experience was very hardening on me, and that isolation had started to set in. But when you have kids, it's a whole different kind of isolation because you need your village around you when you give birth. But when you are an immigrant, then it's a different kind of isolation that you go through, and then you uh, without extended family, both sides did come and stay, but it's not the same as having access to parents and all the time, or them living nearby, and we could, if you could go and drop your kids for some time and get a breather. And yeah, I think I'm narrating at this point, which is why it's a little hard. Um So yeah, I think I'll just stop at the isolation bit because I'm not doing very good justice to all that I want to say. And the marriage broke down in 2020. I had a mental health breakdown, and that breakdown had resulted from that isolation. And another thing that happened in 2019 was I lost my dad. And this was a difficult relationship already for me because of what I shared initially. And 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant with my second kid we both wanted. And immediately, and I also did the last rites for my father because we are two sisters, and I put my foot down that nobody else would do it. I did it. Um, and then I did not allow myself to grieve that death because I poured myself into the pregnancy. Cut to 6 months postpartum, where I thought I was in a good space. I allowed myself to grieve. And that's when my foundation shook a little bit. And I was paranoid that for a brief window, I felt that my kids were not safe. And my reading and my discussions with in therapy and all of that, I thought I was projecting my own unsafety because of that. And there came a point where I had not slept for multiple reasons. And I, in that paranoia, blamed my husband for harming my kids, where that was not true. And I called the cops on him. Instead, I was in that mental health breakdown. I went to a mental health hospital for 9 days. But the funny thing is, I say funny because in that mental health hospital, after 2 days of sleeping, it felt like a retreat. I had not slept for 2.5 years. And there is a statistics that I read this somewhere that not letting people sleep in jails is used as a torture technique. So for someone who has not had 2.5 years of sleep is bound to go to a mental health hospital, which is also why, and the funny, okay, I say funny again. Um, those remaining 7 days, when I was well rested, I I was a researcher again. I met a girl, her name was Rue. She had committed suicide. She was 17 or 18 years old, and I wrote her a letter at 32 years old telling her how beautiful this world is and she doesn't have to kill herself to fit in. I met a Punjabi uncle who was there who had also tried to take his life because he was abandoned by his family. I had a very cerebral discussion with a Jew person on a topic I don't even recall, but I remember feeling refreshed after that discussion. I sat with a black woman and I asked her questions about her family, her kid, and she also did not have access to her kids at the time. And she later on stood up and um, bowed her hands in front of me, saying, I think you will do something good with your life because you have sharp canines, which I found very amusing, sorry. And and then the remaining time I spent in sunshine. I went and just sat in the sun, which was amazing, life-giving. I attended some of their workshops on CBT therapy. I didn't have anything else to do. I also did a lot of writing. I wrote down what social media post I would put because of certain things that I haven't brought up. There are always parts that don't get brought up, but I did that writing. I spent time doing that. I also sat in their library translating Rumi quotes in Hindi so that if another Indian person comes there who cannot read in English, who's an immigrant, they can read and know that there was someone who comes from their land.
Mm.
And I was like, ये भी कर लिया अब. At some point in between, I was told, a friend called me and said that my ex had told her that in when people go to mental health hospitals like these, they don't come back before 90 to 180 days. And I panicked. I panicked because I was like, I was still breastfeeding my younger one. I was like, who's going to feed him? What is going to happen to me? I can keep talking to these people, but like I'm a doer. I'm a thinker, and I'm a doer. So where is the doing happening for me? And so in that panic, I said I will give blanket access of my medical records to my husband. He knows me for 15 years. He will come save me. Which, so I went back. After 9 days, I went back home. I was reunited with my kids. Our relationship it was not the same anymore. Um, I understand that. Uh, 3 months later, my marriage was broken. My medical records were used against me. A case was made that I'm not fit to be their parents. Both my kids were very dramatically taken away from me. I was asked to leave my own home. And eventually what happened was we had two rented apartments. I mean, it took me 6 weeks to get even few hours of access per week. Uh, but we had two rented apartments. The kid would say red house and blue house. They would shunt between the two houses, and uh, that happened. And then my mom had moved in the US, so she was living with me, and I'm glad she was there. Um and then in 2021, while the kids were in my care, and by this time I had gotten some semblance of order in my life, I was baking again. I had baked brownies that my kids loved, and they had eaten some dosa for dinner. So the older one was still having dinner. The younger one was done having dinner. We were having a really good time together. And this was in 2021 because he was in my care at the time. He had a very horrible fall accident. He was in the hospital for 7 days, did not make it. And overnight, I didn't lose one, but both my boys. Uh, Immediately, the case was shifted from separation to divorce, which meant my time in the US was also numbered because my visa was about to expire. And there was, I don't remember the exact details of the order, but uh, for the next 1 year, I was not going to see my older one at all. So I literally packed, gave away stuff, and left. With my mother, I left the US. And this was after I was cleared from police interrogation. Then there was, CPS comes and talks to you. And so I got that police clearance. CPS said they have taken all the information. They asked me question, and I said I think it was something around what was my relationship with kids and how I would be with them, and I said something about social emotional learning, which was something I was already researching a lot. And I said that, I bring a lot of that in my mothering. I allow every single feeling, including the hard ones. And I think I could see that they bought that because it came from a true place in my heart, because that was what I would do with my kids. And in July, I came back to India, and it took me six, and I was like, let me figure out. The day I landed, the next day I had an interview. I didn't get the job. It took me 6 more months to find the right fit. I interviewed a lot of places because I was like, I need to get on my feet so I can get access to my older one or in some form of shape. I also had, I was also talking to my lawyers in the US. I needed that person to work on my case. And uh, so sporadically we were in communication. Uh, in 2022 June, I got divorced, and that reasoning was that I was not having access to my older one, and I on his birthday I said, can you let me talk to him? And my ex said that until there is a formal allowance of that, I will not do that, which felt very cruel to me. And um, and then I think we went for I agreed for mediation. And what happened there was that I knew I did not want my son to go into a trial conversation because the case eventually would have gone for a trial. I did not want him to see the courts. I did not want him to be interrogated. I had already lost one. I wanted him to not be subjected to that aspect. So I was like, okay, I will go ahead with the divorce, and but I will need access to phone calls, and um, which I did. I got access to 2 weeks of phone time. There's a parenting plan, which means every time if they come to India, I have some hours. If I go to the US, I have some hours, which I haven't. I have been in a free state. I have not applied for a visa. There's a notice board in front of me that says I need to apply my B1, B2 visa, but I have been sitting in my free state and I haven't done it. Um uh, yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
That's I think a lot of things. Um, I don't know what question to ask. Possibly next. Possibly also cannot say I imagine what is going through your uh, thought process at any point of time during this. So,
I think I do better. I agreed to this podcast, but that recording dot beep 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 thing is also showing up on my screen, which sometimes makes me stop. I'm usually not this tongue tied when I have to say stuff, but that's fine. I've chosen this, so I also need to let you know that that's what's going on in my head. Um, I think I'll go back to where I stopped. Uh, So yeah, I will have access. I mean, at least I will. There is a parenting plan. Let's start with that. The other thing is that there are three aspects when you go through a divorce. One is the actual divorce with your partner. The second is a parenting plan. The third is the resource division. And the Washington state in the US is quite progressive, and there are laws in place to protect the interests. And so all three decisions when you go through a divorce need to be seen as independent three decisions. And so even the distribution, I think there was equitable distribution of the resources. And w- but I think there were trade-offs. What that meant was I said I will not take maintenance, but I also cannot do child care expenses because I don't I will be on an Indian salary right now. You are in a American tech salary. I cannot match that. Otherwise, if we were on similar salaries, I consider childcare to be my part of the bargain as well. So the trade-off was I don't need maintenance and when we settled the expenses, and I will not do childcare. And the remaining stuff would get divided in proportion with, you know, the money aspect, you have your retirement account aspect, and then the stock aspect. I have access to the money and some of the retirement stuff. The stock, I have no access. It's still with my ex. It's my money, but I don't have access to that. Anyway, and then uh, I come back, started some semblance of a life. And what that meant was wake up, have a shower, um, go out in the sun, try to talk to people. And I think some days that's enough. But I think I also want to call out the fact that when I lost my younger one, the hospital also made me go through grief counseling. And I think some of the repair started to happen there as well, even though I was not ready for that. Like, why are they asking me questions like, what do you fondly remember about your son, Veer? And I was like, he's no longer here. Why do I need to talk about what I fondly remember? But the beautiful thing is they made me they made me answer those questions, and I made notes. And those notes are some of the most amazing things I go to my notes app for and uh, read and find some joy, because Veer had long eyelashes. He was beautiful. Um, he had a mind of his own, and he would do everything that his older brother did. Uh, he also looked like me. The older one looked like his dad. Uh, yeah. So I look at that notes app with a lot of fondness, and why I still say I have kids and not kid, because I'm always going to be a mom of two in presence and in spirit. Maybe the book should be called In Presence and in Spirit and not Never Without My Kids. uh, and so I started looking for jobs, and I came across this organization that worked at the intersection of education, policy implementation, and learning disabilities. And my SERPI experience, where I had done some research around charter schools and students with disabilities, really came in handy there, because such a space in learning disabilities does not exist in India. So I was a second employee after the founder. And another bet somebody took on me, and I'm very grateful for that. This organization called Changing Foundation. And I learned so much around setting up a team, running. I, I, I was in this organization for a little less than 2 years. But by the end of it, I had a team of 9 that I was running. I set up the school education vertical. We were doing some policy work. We had feet in the practice through screening in schools for learning disabilities. And I think I poured all that I had in this work, and I needed to. I also sought therapy off and on. I was finding the right fit, and I did find some of it. Uh, Learned a great deal in the space, learned my best theory of change work uh, that I have done so far at this organization. Met some amazing people uh, who are my friends even to this date. And then I also did I got selected at the end of this job, I got selected in this program called Emerging Women's Leadership Program. That was another turning point. It is a program that my current organization run, but this is also the program where I found a lot of community and language. This is also a program where I dealt with intersections. This is a program where I talked about, how when we speak about privilege, and we say, oh, gender, we are saying, there is male privilege, and but that's just one aspect. And I always used to look at it like a ladder, but it's not a ladder, it's a grid. Because for all of us, we are somewhere on that grid, and think of it as an Excel sheet with different columns. If one is gender, there is caste, there is religion, there is race, there is if you're tall, you're short, if you're a big, if you're a large person, obese person, if you're a thin person, if you're dark, if you're fair skinned, it's a whole list. If you're queer, if you're neurodivergent, and we if you plot it, everybody is on that list, and there is a curve for everyone, and somewhere I have privileges and somewhere and I don't, and which means I understood that I never thought that I need to own that I am a Brahmin and I'm a Hindu, but I do, because they also give me not silent, very local currencies, social capital, that I don't that I never considered, because I've never been disadvantaged because of my caste. I've never been disadvantaged because of my religion. So they also need to be called out, because I have privilege here. And maybe I am here on this podcast and somebody isn't, because of some of this social currency that I've had. So even the privilege needs to be called out. But there are, like I said, there's inequity. uh, I don't have access to my kids. That's a big inequity for me. Sometimes gender has been an inequity for me. Uh, I will not go into every single, like being a big girl has been a inequity for me, because you get bullied for it. Even if you have a cold and you go to a doctor, before prescribing medicine, they will automatically say it's because you are probably, overweight, and that's why you have it. And which is why, even though my dad was not overweight, but like my dad, I'm scared of hospitals, because I don't get the care I need. I did get the care I need in the US, but sometimes I don't get that best fit here. I have to say it. Everybody has their own experience. This is my story, so I get to tell it how I want to. And so, yeah, so the Emerging Women's Leadership Program was a very different kind of turning point. You also get access to you have to choose. Do you need a mentor? Do you need a coach? And you get 3 sessions with them. This is when I was like, I've spent more than a decade in education. I've seen it from multiple lens. Do I need another expert? So I was like, I'll take another leap of faith. I went with a coach, and that was an amazing fit again. And I stayed with this coach for 10 sessions. Her name is Vandana Kilam, and I think that's another reason why I've took up coaching. Um, then I joined my current organization called India Leaders for Social Sector, which is where I think a lot of my puzzle pieces are getting joined. So when I talk about this phase of my life, there is that element of connectedness, which is very opposite to the isolation I talked about. But there is a big concept around integration, because a lot of my theoretical and lived experiences are coming together. And so, yeah, this is a space where I lead a program called Digital Transformation for Social Impact. I led a 7-month research where I tried to find the story of needs, barriers, and opportunities that exist in the social sector when it comes to digital. What are people apprehensive about? And we launched a 92-page industrial size, very corporate like report around it. That's available for free on the website if anybody wants to read. And a lot of findings, but a key one was that uh, 88% of our participants wanted to understand uh, if there is a holistic way of doing capacity building when it comes to digital transformation. And an apprehension was in social impact, everybody's trying to solve for an inequity that they're passionate about, that they feel strongly about. So there is a lot of human centricness to it. And so a lot of people were like, we see the merits in technology, but we want to guard our human centricness because that is who we are. That is what brings life to our work. How do we retain the human centricness and we bring in technology so we can scale, we can get operational efficiency, we can reach beneficiary, what have you. And so we were a team of three, and I need to call out those three because it has been an amazing space for me. Uh, my colleagues, Shraddha Upadhyay and Anirban Chaudhary, who's my boss and leads the Center of Excellence for Digital Transformation. And this is a space where I have always sought autonomy and I have gotten it to some degree. But the way Anirban lets me have autonomy is amazing. And yeah, he is a feminist boss, and I um trigger some people, but I want to be very clear that feminist means providing options and opportunities to women. That's it. It doesn't mean anything else. It also means expanding options. You can look at it from game theory, whatever, but and even Google says it like that. It's not my dictionary. It's not my own interpretation of what feminist means. So I have many such feminist men and women. I am a strong feminist myself. And so I love the autonomy I have in this space, and it fires my creativity like nobody's business. I am very good at what I do. So we ran one iteration of this course that we put together. We put the curriculum together. We brought amazing speakers together. We have a mentoring aspect to it. And we ran a cohort that was hugely successful with 13 nonprofits. And then, because essentially, this is also my life's work. Through this work, we are solving for inequity. And so all my puzzle pieces are coming together through this work, and it's very life-giving, which is a phrase I've used so much in this podcast. And it's not even my go-to phrase. And so we did that, and an interesting thing happened. Uh, the philanthropic duo that was supporting this project initially for 1 year as a experiment, they saw what we had done in that 1 year, and they wholeheartedly supported us for 5 more years, which means I have a long way to go in bringing this vision to life. And Koita Foundation supported this work, and I'm very grateful for that. And but I am also very grateful to my boss, who is above. Okay, my CEO. So my CEO is even above my boss, and so I am third in line in that way. If we were to think of hierarchy, which is another thing, I don't want to go into that. But I get so much support and so much belongingness in this organization. And I have a community of women friends and male friends, and this space is, I think it's the belongingness. I was seeking it, I got it, and I'm thriving in here. So it needs to be called out. And another part about the connectedness is that um in this phase of my life, I am I also met another mentor through, again, my India Leaders for Social Sector program that allows for alumni to get mentors afterwards. Uh, and she gave me a phrase that I have to go back to my notes for. Ruhi, how do you build a personal advisory board for yourself? And I
Mm.
loved it. I had 7 sessions with her and they ended last week. But it's like a personal advisory board, I think, should be something everybody should have it, but women especially should have one. And what that means is, who is your go to for mentoring? Who is your go to for coaching? Who is your finance expert? Which also something last year experienced for the first time. Um, I so I was investing some money that I had, gotten access to on my own by reading Zerodha's Varsity portal, and I was doing some of my own investing in mutual funds. But in last year, I was connected to this very entrepreneurial duo, Neha and Rachna, from Womanista, and I was like, can you validate how I have done so far? And I have no, I'm not from the finance background, and this is something I've just done through reading YouTube videos and all of that. And they were like, for someone who doesn't come from that background, the way you have done your own investing, it is worth calling out, and it's amazing. Um, and that was also very validating. And so, who do you go to for finance expertise? Who do you go to for meditation? I I'm a sucker for deals. So when a Mind Valley, I took Mind Valley subscription when they had Black Friday sale, and I use it for meditation, and I really love their content. Who do you go for therapy needs? Who do you go for psychiatry needs? I do have both of them. Um, who do you go for nutrition? Do you have a gynecologist? Do you have a general physician? I don't, both of them. I still need to find those practitioners for myself. And who are your lawyers? So the funny thing is, I do, I wrapped up my case in 22, the divorce case, but I don't yet have a lawyer in India simply because I'm navigating two jurisdictions, and I will not dilute my case by saying इस पे case डाल दो, just because that's what I've been hearing, because then there is no difference between them and me. So I don't yet have an expert who can navigate both those jurisdictions for me and hold my truth the way I say it and not the way they tell me to portray it. And which is why I am doing the bridge building work and I am my child's lawyer. And what
Mm.
that means is I have access to 2 phone calls a week. I show up on those 2 phone calls since 2022. And this is a space we read books. This is a space where I ask a lot of questions. This is a space where we have a lot of wholesome exchange, my son and I. We unpack characters, and while I do not bring up my son for the fear that my phone might get disconnected, the one that I lost, because I so badly want to unpack that space with my older one. uh, that is a topic I don't navigate because I don't want to lose access to that 2 slots that I have. At least that's what my bias and my fear around it. So, bearing that topic, everything under the sun has a place of to be discussed. And I think I became a coach because I was my son's coach first, and I still am. He pushes me every single day. In fact, yesterday, I had an amazing conversation because, he said, "You're asking me boring questions. Ask me better questions." He's 7, and it made me chuckle because he keeps me on my toes. I have to research now and come up with really good questions for my Wednesday call. But I take this job very seriously. So he mentioned this Netflix show on Ninjago Legos, and he said there. I said, "Do you love any characters?" And he named many characters, and he said there's a Sora and there's a Nia, and they're both women. Sora is deeply creative, and Nia can uh, she's an attacker, and just hearing that reflection was I used the life giving phrase again, was very life giving for me because I think somewhere I'm showing up as a parent. And
Mm.
while I'm not with him, I don't have access, physical access to him. In that space, in those conversations, I think I'm being my son's coach. I met him in 2023 December when my ex came to India to meet his parents, his father in India. And that's when I saw him a year and a half ago. But that phone space is very sacred to me. So, yeah. And also, then coming back to the personal advisory board. So I know it feels like I'm flipping between these things, but there is perfect order inside my head of how I'm bracing this. So let me be very clear about that. Um,
So in that space, I think generally in terms of our audience's point of view, um, I would still look at it as another podcast in the making.
okay.
That because otherwise it will become a little in terms of time. The audience is already
I just realized the time.
pushed to the limit. Yeah. So, but yeah, man, you have given me so much to think about, and I'm sure the audience is also given so much to think about. There's so many layers. I guess so. I understand in terms of now, whenever I ask a question, there's a sigh of, oh, this question is too generic a question. So I'll have to go through so many layers, bring so many aspects at play, and then talk about it. So I think initially it felt like I don't know where this conversation is going, but also like your own journey in its own say microcosm. This also felt like, oh, I'm able to now place so much of what has happened in your life into a perspective, and I would also like to give the same to the audience to make that happen. And I guess there are more podcasts to be recorded, more conversations with you, and I think this is where possibly I would take a little bit of a pass as well to look at what all has happened in this podcast and also give the same space to the audience and say, you know what do you think? And what are your thoughts? Because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of conversations around this. So I would
Can I
just pause
say
here.
one thing?
Yeah, yeah. Go for it. Yeah.
Uh, I was apprehensive about coming on YouTube. I'm a facilitator also. So for people who are watching, I want to set some norms. If you comment on this, um, I'm okay with any kind of comments, but they need to fall under two categories. You have to make sure you're kind, and you have to make sure if you have a question, there is reciprocal curiosity with kindness. And these are also two things I establish in any space I facilitate, and I expect that in your comments as well. Thank you.
Expectations of the self and expectations from others. So both has been covered. And I'm sure, yeah, that the audience will be kind and be reciprocative with the right kind of curiosity there is. And so thank you for your time today. And I'm sure this is just a comma in a long series of conversations. And thanks to your authentic self. I may have cut you off in that closure point purely on a aspect that maybe we are not ready for long form podcast beyond an hour 30, right? So that's the only aspect where I had to pause and say, there's episode 2, possibly episode 3, and more
No,
if
I think, yeah, I think boundaries are good, and I did not see the time, and I think thank you for letting me know that.
superb. So I think there is so much that's happened in this podcast. I've grown, possibly, I don't know, older, wiser in this particular conversation. There's so much to just listen to it again as another fellow podcaster. And I think your promise to me saying, or your introduction to this saying, this is going to be a crazy podcast. I think it is. There has been so much that has been shared, so much that has been navigated, milestoned, and left for heart. So Yeah. And I think it's wonderful that our paths crossed. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. And hopefully more journeys, more questions and more conversations.
Thank you for the
Thank you,
space.
Rohit.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.